I don't think undecided voters exist anymore. And when I say that, I mean in the traditional sense, like someone who can look at both candidates running for president and say, you know what, they both have things that appeal to me. That isn't like a type of voter that can exist anymore. What the Republican and Democratic parties are now so profoundly different in what they're promising and their messaging that it's the outcomes of either are so completely different that there isn't really an individual that exists in any meaningful sense who can look at both of those outcomes and think those are equally the same in terms of how they would affect me. If the 2020 election was anything to go by, looking at turnout and how many people voted, you get the sense that we're kind of at the point where it's like anyone who cares is probably already involved. The game at this point is not getting people to vote for you who might be considering the other option, because they're not. What people are competing with, and I mean like the Democratic and Republican campaigns, they are competing against not voting. That is now the real obstacle. This is a list of presidential elections recently, and it's showing you the share of total eligible voters. What did those voters do? Did they vote Democratic? Did they vote Republican? Or did they not vote at all? And you'll realize pretty quickly that did not vote is the most common answer in almost every presidential election. The exception, of course, being 2020 up the top there. I believe this is right. Joe Biden was the first presidential candidate going back to like the early 1900s who got more votes than there were eligible voters who did not vote. That 33% of eligible voters who did not vote in 2020, that realistically is all that's really left to go after. No one who is engaged in politics at this point is really going to change their mind. Think about it. What would it take for a Harris supporter to become a Trump supporter or a Trump supporter to become a Harris supporter? Think about how unrealistic that flip is at this point. Now, there are a lot of reasons that Trump won in 2016, but I think one of the big things that we don't talk a lot about is that he was able to engage people who otherwise did not care about the political process. People who had given up on politics, he was able to motivate and get them engaged. And that paid off massively for him in 2016. Now, that 33% of non-voters probably have a preference, but the issue is they don't have such a strong preference for either candidate that they would consider voting. They effectively, they don't care. So I was reading 538 today, which is like a subsection of ABC News focused on like election predictions and odds and polling. And they had a really interesting perspective on what Taylor Swift means for this election. And that sounds stupid because like I hate celebrity worship as much as everybody else. But the way they put it is that Swift is almost the other side of the coin to what Trump is in terms of motivation. Her appeal is not that she can convince Trump voters to come over to the other side and vote for Harris, but her appeal is that she can motivate people who were somewhat left-leaning to engage in the political process where they otherwise wouldn't have. And look, you might like brush this off as just like, look, it's one celebrity endorsement. What does it mean? She is probably, at this moment, the most successful musical artist in the world. At this moment, at least. And she has 300 million followers on Instagram. And I saw the numbers that kind of blew my mind, which was that in an Instagram story of hers, she posted a link to vote.org, basically the site that lets you know how to get registered wherever you live in the United States. 300,000 people followed that link to vote.org. She had 300,000 of her followers go and look at the website that shows you how to get registered to vote. And you might think that's irrelevant, but in the aftermath of that post, vote.org confirmed that 35,000 people, a tenth of Taylor's fans that went to go look at it, actually registered to vote. We are talking about an election that could be decided by tens of thousands of votes in certain areas. So 30,000 people, 35,000 rather, registering to vote because of one celebrity endorsement definitely fucking matters. And to Trump's credit, as a campaign operative, he is doing the exact same thing when it comes to engaging people that otherwise might vote for him but can't be persuaded to actually go out and vote in person. If you've probably noticed, if you paid any attention, that Trump is doing the podcast rounds like there is no tomorrow. The biggest examples, of course, being Lex Friedman and probably Theo Von, and apparently he's trying remarkably hard to get onto Joe Rogan before the election, and it's actually Rogan that's pretty skeptical about doing that, so I don't know if that's going to happen, but it's clear that he is targeting that demographic of men who listen to these podcasts but are not politically engaged. He wants to come across as a trustworthy figure that is worth supporting. And that might just be how elections work from now on. I think that notion of like there is a middle America, there is a sensible middle ground that we can get on our side. If we just appeal to them, we'll win. I feel like that middle is gone. Just purely by the circumstances of this political environment, it cannot exist. So when that middle is gone, what you have to do is get turnout and get people to turn out like they have never done so before. Look, I am certain that there are probably people in their thousands that genuinely could be persuaded to vote either way and can't really see one being significantly worse than the other, as it were. But the type of personality you need to be that open-minded to such extreme opposing views of America is not something that's that common. The week that Joe Biden dropped out, voter registration among black women under 30, as compared to the same week in 2020, went up 262%. This is the type of campaign that you really need. You can't be hoping that people in the middle of America come over to you because they're not there anymore. You need to find a way to get people who would otherwise not engage in politics somehow become excited or motivated about it. And I guess the jump from Biden to Harris is probably the most extreme example of that, but that's just going to be the norm of politics going forward unless there is some enormous shift in the landscape that takes things back to a moderate 2012 style American politics. Turnout among young voters in 2020 was at a record high, and that record high was only 50%. 50% of young voters turned out and supported Joe Biden by enormous margins. And in doing so, got him elected. And do you know what he did? He started abolishing student loan debt. Young people consistently are the least likely to engage in politics because they have the least faith in it. It is the most tragic type of self-fulfilling prophecy. Young people don't believe in politics, they don't engage. People stop caring about them because they don't even vote, and subsequently the system gets worse and worse and worse for them. But when if young people turned out at the rates at which 65-year-olds did, how they came out to vote, young people would determine the outcome of every election. And I feel like people are starting to realize that. If you are traditionally a non-voter for any reason, what you might want to think about now is that you are the demographic that will make the difference. If you've ever thought that your vote didn't matter because you didn't engage in the system and you didn't like the system, think about that. This might be the one election where your perspective and what motivates you is what determines the presidency.